Hey folks, Mr. Hammond, and now we're going to be looking at, yesterday we looked at heredity, and that's the passing on of mental or physical characteristics or traits from parents to offsprings. So today we're going to be looking at dominant and recessive traits. So let's go ahead and get started. So, in real big, I'm going to write here dominant. So there's two types of genes that can be passed on, a dominant gene or a recessive gene. And Gregor Mendel discovered this, that it's not so much a blending of genes like they used to think in science, that if like a mom had like blue eyes and a dad had brown eyes, the child would get kind of bluish brown eyes. But we know that really doesn't exist. I mean, you have green and brown eyes called hazel, but you don't have bluish brown eyes. And they discovered that it wasn't that genes blended together and that traits blended together. It's actually that some genes dominate other genes. That means they cover them up. So you could have a child who has a blue-eyed gene, which is recessive, but they got a brown-eyed gene from their dad, and so that brown-eyed gene covers up the blue-eyed genes, and they have brown eyes. So we're going to write dominant real big, versus, and then a nice cursive. We're going to write recessive. I'll do like a cursive mix, because I know some of you don't know how to do that, and that's all right. Okay, so dominant versus recessive. Recessive is more of are the ones that can be covered up. They're the weaker of the two genes. Now, when scientists talk about genes, they usually use letters to represent that gene, and they take the first letter of the dominant gene type or trait. So what I mean by that is let's take eyes. We've been talking about that. So scientists will use a capital B to represent eye color because the dominant gene or trait is brown eyes. And brown begins with B. Now, it just so happens that blue eyes begins with B too. But so let's not use blue. Let's use green, because green's recessive too. The recessive trait is always represented by a lowercase letter, and it's always the lowercase of whatever the dominant gene type is. So in this case, we're going to say the recessive, which is true, is going to be green eyes. And although green begins with G, remember the dominant was a B, brown eyes. So we use the lowercase b for it. That represents green eyes, a recessive trait. Let's go ahead and draw a cool eye here. I always make sounds when I draw. Whoa, it's kind of spooky looking. All right, sorry about that, guys. The announcement came on, so I had to turn this off so we could listen to those. Okay, so again, as I was saying, the dominant and recessive, the dominant always covers up the recessive. We're going to write that down here. Dominant genes and we can also say traits, because they come out as traits, but they're on the genes, on the chromosomes. Cover up recessive. Now, if you remember from our earlier talk, mom and dad each contribute one gene, because they contribute half of a chromosome, and on their half a chromosome is one gene. So you end up with two genes, one from mom and one from dad, and you could end up with something called a dominant purebred gene, which is B if you got two dominant genes, one from mom and one from dad, so you'd have two there, and that would give you brown eyes because it has the dominant gene. So that's one option of something you could get. You could also have, let's imagine mom gives you a dominant brown because she has brown eyes, but dad has green eyes and he gives you a recessive gene. Now, even though you have that recessive gene, you're still going to have brown eyes because the dominant gene covers it up. Sorry, brown eyes. The only way that you can get a recessive trait from genes is to have both recessive genes, one from mom and one from dad. And that's why it gets so funny sometimes, because like you can have a kid, you can have a mom and a dad, and we'll talk about this next time with Punnett squares, who are both this. This is what we call a hybrid. Hybrid being a mix. A good way to remember this is you have hybrid cars. They use electric and gas. Hybrid is a mix of two. This is called a purebred dominant. But if you have a mom and dad who are a hybrid mix and they both contribute the recessive gene, then the kid ends up with two recessive genes and they get a different trait than their parents. So where you get like a blue-eyed kid from two brown-eyed parents. Or a redhead kid from two parents who both have brown or black hair. Well, if you get two recessive genes, you're getting those green eyes. You get the recessive trait. And that's called purebred recessive. Now, purebred means it's all the same. That's all that purebred means. You buy a purebred dog, and if it's a Cocker Spaniel, then it's purebred Cocker Spaniel means it's 100% Cocker Spaniel. So this is purebred recessive. All right, that's really all I had to go over. Just a couple reminders, and let's go ahead and draw this. Oh, I noticed you couldn't see that. Let's go ahead and do a little reminder drawing up here on the top, and that's about chromosomes. This is a chromosome. And our genes are found on these chromosomes. And genes display traits like eye color. Okay, that's a wrap up. Thanks for joining me. And next time we'll talk about the Punnett square.